Well, good evening, everybody. Great to see you. My name's Candy Bingham. I'm the president of Good for Manly. And oh boy, are we excited. We had this planned a week ago, and I'm just so grateful to our speakers. They were all ready to go a week ago. And of course, Gladys had different ideas. So here we are tonight. And I have to warn you that we have been practicing, but I'm not too sure how our slide shares are going to go. But hey, we're professionals, and we're prepared to have a bit of fun tonight as well. Very important topic. Our topic tonight is the recovery process for North Head. And I think we're all really concerned when those massive fires took over North Head last summer. And so tonight we thought it would be worthwhile getting the specialists to talk to us, the experts, to tell us actually what's happening with the recovery process. So as you can see, we have three speakers who are joining us tonight. And I'd like to welcome, first of all, Chad Weston from National Parks. And then we've got Sophia Lacey and Dr Viyanna Leo from Australian Conservancy to speak to us tonight. So just some quick background. So North Head Sanctuary comprises 74 hectares of land and is managed in an integrated manner with the adjoining Sydney Harbour National Park. Together, the sanctuary and the National Park protect most of North Head, respecting one of the most important sites for biodiversity conservation within the Sydney Basin. So we're going to hear first of all tonight from Chad Weston. Some quick background on national parks. They manage more than 870 of New South Wales national parks and reserves, which covers, imagine this, 7 million hectares of land, which represents more than 9% of the land area for the whole state of New South Wales. Massive. Management of these areas involves a wide range of responsibilities, including plant and animal conservation, fire management, sustainable tourism and visitation, research, education, volunteering programs, and so much more. Now, tonight, to speak to us about the National Parks Hazard Reduction Program and North Head Fire Recovery, I'd really like to thank Chad Weston for joining us. Chad's the manager for Sydney North area, Greater Sydney branch of the National Parks Wildlife Service. He manages 3 parks, Ku-ring-gai Chase, Sydney Harbour and Ku-ring-gai. Now, Chad, I think you're going to try and share your slides now. Let's see how that goes.
I will. Thanks for that, Candy. And hello, everyone. The last national park there is Garigal National Park.
Garigal, thank you.
Yeah, no, that's all right. So I'm going to try and share my screen here, and then I'm going to turn my video off because I'm going to be looking at my notes at the same time. So can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Yep, good to go. Okay, what I didn't do is just turn my video off there. All right, so what I'm going to talk about tonight, and so there's obviously a number of things going on up at North Head at the moment, but I think we all realise that what the community really wants to hear about at the moment is our hazard reduction planning process and our fire recovery up at North Head. So I'll go through the hazard reduction planning process for national parks and indeed fire authorities in general. First, and I'll time myself here because I haven't timed this whole presentation. It's been stitched together a bit, and I'll try not to let it run too far over time. So I'm sure you're all aware that National Parks is one of the 4 fire authorities, and you can see them there on the screen. It's Fire and Rescue, the RFS, ourselves, and Forestry Corporation. And so that obviously allows those firefighting authorities to work together to respond to both wildfires and plan with our stakeholders our prescribed burn or hazard reduction burn program. So for national parks, we've got more than 1,000 staff who are experienced in fire specialist roles. So whether they be frontline firefighters, planners, burn planners, incident controllers, air attack supervisors that lead planes and large air tankers to major fires. And we also sit in key positions in those other fire authorities. We deploy all over New South Wales, obviously, around Australia and often overseas. Um, so, and we use an incident control system across all of the fire authorities that's standardised. So that means roles are the same across all incidents, and whether it's fires, floods, strandings, across the whole country, it's a standardised ICS. Always one agency has control of a fire, although everyone feeds into it depending on the tenures involved. And so that agency is the incident controller. And so which agency that is depends on a number of factors. And I'm sure you've all seen in the news at the moment, they're looking at the recent large bushfires of 2019, 2020. And it includes things like the situation, the terrain, the interface. So, for example, for a fire close to a high density urban interface, in Sydney, fire and rescue would control that incident. Remote fires in bush, national parks, state forests, RFS, or off park in those remote areas, it's RFS generally. So just to walk you through our fire policy summary. So obviously the key drivers are protect life and community assets. We're cooperative and coordinated in our fire management arrangements with our neighbours and fire agencies, and we manage fire regimes within reserves to maintain and enhance biodiversity. We protect our cultural sites and places, our heritage places, and we assist others in developing fire management practices to conserve their values as well. So that includes our neighbours and the like, or our key stakeholders. So our role in the state disaster planning framework is, as you see there, we're a firefighting authority for the suppression of wildfires, lead agency in the management of and rescue of marine mammals, of which this time of year we're very busy with. We're a support agency to New South Wales Fire and Rescue for hazmat incidents, a support agency to police for search and rescue, and a support agency for floods, storms, earthquakes, agricultural and animal health emergencies, similar to what we've seen recently with the floods which affected many of our national parks, particularly up at the Hawkesbury. And coordination of environmental services. We've got a very disparate and diverse skill set, so it's wonderful to work for national parks. You get to be involved in many different aspects. So, how do we go about coordinating bushfire management? Largely it centres around the Bushfire Management Committees, which is a multi-agency committee held at local fire control stations, so RFS stations. The BFMCs provide a forum for cooperative and coordinated bushfire management. We prepare, review and monitor our bushfire risk management plans. And so what we agree on, so all those fire authorities get together and many stakeholders, including community input, is around what we're going to do in the prescribed burn space for the next 5 years. So we identify assets and treatments across different areas, and it's discussed every year, and a plan is set for the next 12 months to set priorities, and that's risk based, but obviously considers a number of other factors. So with bushfire management planning, so we go through each year, and the operations coordination plan, we undertake pre-season checks and operational responses to ensure we have firefighters up to date with all their currencies. So for example, we've got coming up for national parks our fire prep days and our TBAs, where everyone undertakes their currency checks to be firefighters and the like. So National Parks fire planning is guided by the statewide strategy, Living with Fire. And we, for all parks, we have fire management strategies, and all of those are available online. So you can search, for example, fire management strategy for Sydney Harbour National Park, North Head. And those are considered live operational documents, and they can change with each fire season, but generally they're largely set. But in the next slide, I'll talk more about the fire management strategies, and I'll use the North Head fire management strategy as an example. We have, well, it's a 3 to 5 year hazard reduction program. It's moving into a 5-year program, given RFS has moved that way. So we've just been dealing with that at the moment, plus a new processes for risk-based assessment. And they need to be flexible and change with our priorities, because things do change. But there's always a process to review those changes. So the way we do this within our branch, I guess within Greater Sydney, is we have weekly meetings with our fire team. We have weekly meetings with other fire authorities. So we meet with our our partners at the RFS and New South Wales Fire and Rescue through those burn seasons, and we already have set out what our priorities are for our burns through those seasons. But they shift and change depending on the weather, the aspect, whether it's events. There's things going on, a whole bunch of influences that can change our priorities from period to period. So the planning process for us includes obviously an environmental assessment. We have a burn planner who undertakes the burn planning, and then a burn plan assessor who's more experienced and one of the hardest accreditations to get in national parks. And then it goes through an approval process where it's reviewed, returned and edited, and all sorts of. It's a very long process. It comes through me, and ultimately it heads up to the to the branch director for Greater Sydney, for example, for final sign off. So if we have a look at, so this is the North Head Reserve Fire Management Strategy, or it's a condensed version of. It's an extract of the Reserve Fire Management Strategy. And so I'll talk a little bit about how these strategies are prepared and what we can see on the map. Excuse me. So fire management strategies are formal documents prepared in accordance with our Park Reserves Plan of Management, which is a statutory document as to how we manage the park. The policies and procedures set out in our fire management manual, which is also available public access. The strategies include operational management guidelines and maps such as this, showing previous bushfires and recent hazard reductions, the details of the terrain, including natural features that may be useful during our activities, fire management zones, so whether it be strategic fire advantage, asset protection, or vegetation management. So, for example, strategic fire advantage and asset protection, is largely centred around protection of assets. Plant communities and vegetation types, threatened species, our cultural and historic heritage sites, the facilities and the equipments at the site, the location of fire advantages, whether they be fire trails or water supply points, dams, helipads, and on it goes. So I'll just take a drink here. So when these reserve fire management strategies are developed, they're developed in consultation with the community, the BFMCs, other fire authorities, and land managers and other key stakeholders. So the strategies are placed on public exhibition before they're finalised, and members of the public are always encouraged to provide comments. And again, they're considered live documents and they can change. So I guess just for this map, and you can all go away and have a look at the North Head Reserve Fire Management Strategy. But the coloured shapes with the cross-hatching represent assets, showing whether they're human, economic, or environmental, or cultural. The numbers are labels for each asset, and you can see on number 11, for example, is the wastewater treatment plant, the orange one up in the top right there. The thick blue lines show the many historic sandstone walls on North Head, for example. And the information on this map is combined with other data, including fire history, terrain, to prepare fire management strategy and identify appropriate treatments. Some of the treatments identified in North Head fire management strategy are shown in the table on the bottom right, and include community education, hazard reduction, ignition management, and the like. So I am racing through this. I'm just mindful that I'm going to go over. So this is again, we've already kind of gone over this quickly. This is the burn planning process. So hazard reduction plans are developed by trained burn planners. It's one of the hardest courses to get through. We consult with stakeholders and experts, whether it be around heritage or the environment. They assess the fuels, assets, control lines, terrains, and many other points of information. And this enables the burn planner to create a prescription for the burn. So by prescription, we mean the fuel and the weather conditions that will enable the vegetation to burn to the appropriate prescription of that vegetation type safely. So after this, the burn plan is assessed by an experienced fire expert, and that can be with us or external to us. Once the fire expert is satisfied, the plan will be sent to myself as an area manager and then on to branch director for approval. And our burn plans are shared with the other fire authorities ahead of the burns taking place. So again, burns can impact both positively and negatively on the environment, and they have the potential to degrade both natural and cultural values across the landscape and impact on assets. With the exception of fire suppression operations, fire management activities can be planned and the impacts well defined prior to the activities being undertaken. Though not necessarily mutually exclusive, it is recognised on occasion the need to protect human life and property, which is the key driver, may override some conservation objectives. But they're always considered, and that's the environmental impact assessment process. And it depends on the significant areas of natural and cultural heritage identified, or already identified in our reserve fire management strategies. So, and there is a code, the Bushfire Environmental Assessment Code is what we use as the primary environmental impact assessment for carrying out our hazard reduction work. And National Parks has the authority to issue a hazard reduction certificate for hazard reduction works under that code. And then there's triggers which define what sort of environmental impact assessment is required. And that's things like threatened species or endangered ecological communities, significant heritage or cultural sites. And so there you've got in front of you there, you've got the three types of EAs or environmental assessments that we may undertake depending on what triggers it. And so through that process, we work with conservation and heritage experts to ensure all the environmental considerations are captured. Right. And so insofar as operational preparation, and I guess this one will be a key one, for those of you listening. So our HR preparation leading up to the burn, excuse me. I've been talking a lot today. It's the end of the financial year. So will include our on-ground prep works. So that's, as you can see in the photo, that's someone taking some fuel moistures, which determines how much moisture is in the different stratas of fuel that we're burning. Developing or maintaining the burn control lines that we work from and egress to. Sometimes laying kilometres of hoses. Resolving water sources. Whether they be buoy walls or natural sources. The notification processes to agencies, neighbours, stakeholders, and to sensitive areas. We always do smoke plume modelling, particularly in Sydney, where we get a lot of feedback about smoke. It's a fine balance to always ensure we don't impact on communities or specific sites, that are smoke sensitive. And some burns can be pretty complex with that. We might have major arterial roads on one side and nursing homes on the other, or schools, or etc. But it's always a multi-agency approach. So, for example, at one of our burns in Sydney this autumn, we had 160 firefighters across fire and rescue, RFS, and ourselves. But we also use forestry and council firefighters to assist. With things like RMS traffic control, we have occupancy licenses on roads, resourcing crews and facilities, and crews come from all over the state to assist us with these burns. So the go, no go decision, that's based on the special weather that we receive, the forecasted weather, the available resources. And if the forecast or the resources aren't favourable, we just don't go ahead. And that happens all the time. There's, within my area in Sydney North, and we've undertaken maybe eight burns this year. There's been 4, I think, that we've said no to because the conditions just weren't right. So when we get a special weather forecast, for example, the IC and area manager, along with other fire experts, will determine if it goes ahead on the day, and the incident controller may choose not to proceed if the conditions are unfavourable. So that's kind of largely it about our fire management or hazard reduction management. That's just a bit of a wrap up there, I guess, on your screen of what we treated recently, and the percentage of areas that we've treated working with other agencies and the resources that we've got. So you can see that we've got over 1,000 firefighters and incident controllers, number of vehicles, and heavy plant and aircraft. There's actually 5 aircraft now. So now from there, we'll move on to the North Head fire recovery, and I'm at 17 minutes, so that's looking all right. So there's some of the key facts for you. So 25 hectares of Eastern Suburbs Banksia scrub were affected. So for those of you that don't know, that's an endangered or critically endangered ecological community, as is Sydney freshwater wetlands. Obviously the animals on the site were affected, along with all of the fencing that surrounds the Fairfax walking track. We had some very minor damage to some of our heritage items, but I'm sure AWC will talk about some of the assets affected on trust land, but that was, walking tracks and the like. So our immediate initial response was great, actually, across the agencies and across the stakeholders and land managers at the site. Everyone came together very quickly for a nil tenure approach to fire recovery. So, first things we're looking to reopen what areas we could that were safe, undertaking, wildlife search and rescue, assessing the impacts, installing supplementary habitats, and immediately commencing pest control, because obviously pest control post-fire, is an important part of what we do. So, and in order to do that, we prepared a recovery plan, and the Harbour Trust has fed into that, and that's now a joint recovery plan, which very much assists with that nil tenure or cross tenure approach that we've all very much wanted to come at it from. So the key objectives of the plan are described there. So we ensure the safety of staff and the community, restore access to the park, preserve those natural values, and indeed enhance, protect the values, the cultural and heritage values of the park, ensure that the resources used in the recovery are allocated wisely and efficiently. So there's a quick rundown there, and you'll see a lot of these going forward. But just some dots on the recovery plan actions. And so we'll go through them one at a time. So the coordination and planning. So again, it's a tenure neutral approach with the Harbour Trust and AWC and others, council, fire and rescue, Sydney Water, lessees and the people that live at the site. One of the things that we've set up with the Trust leading on it was the Bushfire Recovery Advisory Group. So the Trust and National Parks co-chair the Bushfire Recovery Advisory Group, and a number of key stakeholders and members of the community sit on that. And the intent of that is to talk about recovery actions and get that input and advice from the community and key stakeholders. And we continue to work closely with internal national parks and AWC and Sydney Harbour Trust. Everyone has, you know, internal experts, but we also work with many external experts. So visitor experience and safety is closely tied into our infrastructure actions. So they're both highlighted there. The fire event created some hazards across North Head that need to be addressed. Some have been addressed and monitored as a priority to ensure, you know, our staff and visitor safety. So one of the things we did post fire, I'm sure you all know, in 2016 there was a large rockfall, you know, to the west of the Fairfax lookout, and as a result of that, you know, we had some geotechnical advice around the lookouts up there, and so the configuration was changed. So after the fire, one of the opportunities that did present itself was for us to undertake more geotechnical assessments, and that has resulted obviously in the closure of the main lookout up there at North Head at Fairfax. And so we're now working through that process to relocate that lookout out of, you know, out of an area of geotechnical risk, basically. And so there's advice about that on the website. Excuse me. So the other thing that gave us an opportunity to do was get in and remove much of the debris and the rubbish that historically has sat up at that site in the bushland. So we removed a significant amount of rubbish from the bushland, including some hazardous items like you know, unspent shell casings and batteries and asbestos and the like. So we're obviously still working through. Most of you will know that the Fairfax Scenic Loop is now open to public access with temporary fencing in place. But we're still working through the process with the insurance company to resolve the permanent fencing design up there. So we've undertaken all of that design and the costings for that, and that's now sitting with our insurer for them to assess, and then we can get on with replacing that. And that'll dovetail also with the works related to relocating the Fairfax lookout. We've installed information signage around the headland, and as has the trust, just talking about the hazards associated with, you know, going to fire affected areas, and the risks to the environment, you know, going into these fire affected areas where you can trample on. Hang on, sorry. Regenerating plants and the like. So community updates. So we have been providing newsletters, and we've got a website that's just about to go live on the fire recovery actions. Has taken us a little bit of time to get that website prepared and up, and part of that is to do with, you know, we obviously want to make sure that we had all of our fire recovery actions properly described and in a cross tenure way. So with coordination from our partners. But if you know, if people do want to ask questions, and many people have, you can jump onto the National Parks, Sydney Harbour National Park North Head website, and there's a phone number and an email there. And many of the community have already asked us questions about the fire and our burn processes. So there's the email for everyone if you want to sign up to the newsletter. Or ask any questions. And the photo there is we've had a few of these sessions with different bodies and organisations and representing the community and stakeholders and the like, where we've taken them out to the site and talked through the fire and the recovery process, and again with the assistance of AWC, who talk shortly, and all the other stakeholders across the site. So flora. So, I'm noting the time, so I'm going to rush through some of these notes a bit because I'm 25 minutes in. But again, working cross tenure, we've undertaken assessments of the EECs, such as the Eastern Suburbs Banksia Scrub and the Sydney Freshwater Wetland. We've had, again, both internal experts undertaking assessment of those areas. And so obviously initially, immediately post-fire, and it continues now, whether it be engineered outcomes or whether it be by signage, we restrict access to those burn areas while those areas recover. Again, both the Trust and National Parks were supporting research programs. So, for example, this drone image was taken as part of a research project looking to identify syndromes of recovery. But the anecdotal, and we haven't got all the data back yet, but the anecdotal evidence suggests that that there are species that likely indicate recovery trajectories. The monitoring will also allow us to potentially top up the regeneration and decide if we need to intervene with supplementary planting. So one of the interesting things, around fire is the different fire thresholds. And so, all fire authorities, when they're undertaking hazard reduction or prescribed burns, look to do those within the ecological fire thresholds of any ecological community. And so across all of our parks, there's different fire histories. And so some areas have been burnt more recently than others. And so your recoveries differ, I guess, across those different fire thresholds. And those fire thresholds are clearly defined for all ecological communities. Oh, already done that one, haven't we? Hang on. Sorry, we're talking about flora. So fauna. So initially, a series of extraordinary meetings were held with the long-nosed bandicoot recovery team, and the members include us and AWC and Department of Planning, Industry and Environment and the Sydney Uni. Supplementary habitat was immediately installed. So you've got bandicoot bungalows and AWC's refuge tunnels, which you may have seen up there, and I'm sure AWC will talk about 28 minutes. National Parks has also funded cardboard habitat pods, which are durable. They were designed in consultation with Macquarie University, and they've already started being deployed, and more will go out. Excuse me. AWC National Parks, or AWC, led a small mammal survey, which we assisted with. And research began in February to understand the benefits of supplementary feeding following the fire. And we continue to work with AWC, the zoo, Murdoch University on this project. So supplementary food will be provided at feeding stations around the headland and refreshed weekly. We carried out a whole of headland long-nosed bandicoot survey this year in May, both again with assistance from AWC, Northern Beaches Council and Sydney Uni. So for that survey, there was approximately 325 captures, and the new big bandicoots discovered were microchipped for monitoring. And this number of captures compares pretty favourably with previous surveys from previous years. And look, a range of other healthy wildlife, including echidnas, ringtails, reptiles, and the like, have been seen pretty quickly after the fire, foraging in the fire-affected areas. So it indicates there's obviously food available, and the bandicoots were also both in burnt and unburnt areas when we undertook that survey. This is a quick video, bandicoot being released. Oh, 30 minutes, move on. Heritage. So we've undertaken heritage engineering assessments of all of our heritage fortifications and the fire-affected sandstone walls, or potentially, which is, again, there's been another opportunity for us to deal with. So we only had some really minor fire effects on our heritage structures, but having undertaken all those engineering assessments, it's now allowed us to kind of start moving towards some other conservation and stabilisation works of those structures. we obviously an Aboriginal heritage survey was undertaken immediately afterwards, and no damages were recorded, which is great. Weed control. So weed control began in December with initial focus on some of our priorities for weed control. So blue paspalum, bone seed, glory lily, those emerging weeds that would impact on the recovery of those ecological areas. I guess, and we've spent, if you want a dollar amount, I guess we've spent in the order of say $40,000 so far on weed control, and much of that's come from grants. We've also obviously got the community up there assisting us as volunteers. So that's a photo of the Bush Regen volunteers at North Head. And we'll continue to do that. That's just part of normal, post-hazard reduction work. Pest control. So we have a well-established pest control program at North Head. And look, I won't go into all the details because I'm already over my time, but obviously there's a bunch of key threatened species at North Head, and we work cross tenure with the other agencies to complete our pest control program in accordance with our branch pest management strategy, which is again another document which is available online. So and it's another one that goes out for stakeholder and community consultation before it's adopted as what we use to define our pest management strategies. Well, I guess one of the things I will say about post-fire is there is potential for increased, predator activity in post-fire landscapes. And so, both Sydney Harbour Federation Trust and National Parks immediately post-fire installed additional camera traps and the like to determine if there was any further incursions from predators. But that, I guess, I'm over, so I'll just pull it up there, Candy.
That's great. Okay, thanks so much, Chad. I have to say, I know I said that we would keep the questions to the end, but there have been quite a few questions coming through. Everybody wants to know, Chad, given all the planning and all the procedures and everything that you have to do for the fire burns, what went wrong? I mean, it was obviously a windy day, and the community is just curious. What went wrong?
Well, look, that was the primary issue, is that we do. I guess for a start, fire and rescue, along with national parks, undertook this burn fire and rescue with the incident control of the site, and we work with them all the time. We always have contingencies in place. Fire is dynamic, and when we're putting it into a landscape, particularly given the vegetation communities out here, and heath or ESBS is a really interesting one, because you can, and this is kind of, you need to get enough fire in it to get it to go. You get too much fire in it, and obviously, heath can move pretty quickly. But the main reason why that fire spotted over its containment line was because of the special weather forecast that we got that predicted an increase in winds that were within prescription to a point. It was a very small burn for us, but those winds were ultimately, at the end of the day, much higher than the forecast anticipated. And look, fire is complex, and so North Head also is, the terrain is complex as well. So coming off the ocean there, and with the impacts of the cliffs and what it does, what the localized weather does, can be challenging as well. But like I said, there's always contingencies in place. We have fallbacks. At the end of the day, we had 3 aircraft, over 100 firefighters on that fire, and And the other thing I would say is that other parts, or the areas that were ultimately burned, were also part of our future burn program. And although we always burn in a mosaic pattern. Ultimately, those areas have now been treated as well.
Okay. I must say the response was very impressive on the day. I mean, I've never seen so many fire engines screaming up to North Head.
Yeah.
And please pass on our thanks, will you, to the enormous amount of work that you and your team have done. We really do appreciate it as a community. So we'll let you off the hook for the moment. So thank you, Chad, for your presentation.
Thanks, Ben.
And I will mention to others that there is a question and answer option at the bottom of your screen, and we will be taking questions at the end of the total presentation. So our next presenters are from the Australian Wildlife Conservancy, AWC. It's the largest private owner of land for conservation in Australia, protecting endangered wildlife at 30 sanctuaries, covering a total of more than 6.5 million hectares. With a focus on practical land management informed by world-class science, AWC is implementing a dynamic new model for conservation. AWC works in partnership with the Sydney Federation Trust to deliver a suite of science projects within the North Head Sanctuary. And we had a little bit of a preview of their work recently, and I must say it is very impressive, and you're going to find this extremely interesting tonight. We have two presenters from AWC. First of all, we have Sophia Lacey, who's the Development Executive, and she has a master's degree in environmental management and has a passion for protecting Australia's unique country for future generations to enjoy. And also we have with us Dr Viyanna Leo, who's a wildlife ecologist with the Australian Wildlife Conservancy, who has worked for them for 5 years and is currently leading the conservation program at North Head. Prior to her work with AWC, Viyanna specialised in large carnivores and human-wildlife conflict, and she studied her PhD in Northern Australia on the role of dingoes as trophic regulators. You might have to look that up, I had to. And she also lived in Botswana, where she researched brown hyenas and lions. What a fascinating background you have, Viyanna. So over to you, ladies. Please let us know what you're doing up at North Head.
Thank you so much, Candy. So I'm just going to turn off my camera for now. Here we go. So I hope everyone can see my screen.
All good.
Okay, fantastic. So I just want to start off by acknowledging the Gadigal and Wangal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the land on which I live, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to provide a bit of a background on the organisation, and then I'll pass over to Viyanna, and she's going to outline the work being undertaken at North Head. So I'll give a kind of background and overview to AWC, and then we'll move over to the North Head section. So I hope you feel inspired by the work that's being done, and let's dive in. So I just want to start by saying that Australia is one of the most biologically diverse countries on the planet. We're home to 7 to 10% of all species on Earth. Our wildlife is so unique. Many species are found nowhere else, and you can't see species like the numbat anywhere else in the world. And Australian wildlife and ecosystems represent a precious natural asset and something that we should nurture and celebrate. But unfortunately, we've got a very poor record of protecting our wildlife, of properly looking after our natural capital. And Australia has, in fact, got the worst mammal extinction record in the world. So 34 mammals have gone extinct since European settlement, and that represents about 1/3 of the world's mammal extinctions over that period. To give you some context, the US has lost 1 species in that space of time. So, already the UN Global Assessment Report says that around 1 million species are already facing extinction within many decades, unless action is taken to reduce the intensity of drivers of biodiversity loss. So, in the past decade, we've lost 2 species. We've lost the Christmas Island pipstraw and the Bramble Cay melamies, and that's been on our watch. So it's a real problem, and that's where AWC comes in. So our mission's really clear. It's effective conservation of our native species, and we achieve our mission through the 4 key areas on your screen here. So I've just put in bold the 2 middle points. So I think these are most important in terms of our work. So it's to get out on the ground, deliver practical land management, and using science to inform, measure, and continuously improve what we do. So just a quick overview of AWC. So we've got 31 sanctuaries across Australia. So that's a total of 6.5 million hectares, which is around the same size as the landmass of Tasmania. And that's in iconic regions such as the Kimberley, Cape York, Lake Eyre, the Top End, just to name a few. So AWC, as Candy mentioned, is the largest non-government holder of conservation land in Australia, and it's one of the largest in the world. So we've got around 179 full-time equivalent staff who are full-time looking after all these sanctuaries, and 80% of our staff are based in the field, and that makes us really different from any other conservation organisation. The other thing that makes us quite different is that we are funded predominantly by private donations. So all the properties that you can see here have been carefully selected to capture areas where our natural capital is richest. And we've been evolving our model by entering into lots of different partnerships, such as North Head. So I just want to take you through how our model works. So we do research to understand how the landscape works and to identify key threats to wildlife. So that means investigating the connections and interactions between feral animals, fire, vegetation, and wildlife. And we use the scientific understanding to develop conservation land management strategies. So just to give a great example, despite COVID in 2020, we conducted 196,410 camera trap nights and 61,494 cage, funnel, pit, and trap survey trap nights, which adds up to 957,409 trap nights. Here we go. And that's Australia's largest biodiversity monitoring program. And on the topic of fire, we also get people on the ground to look after country. So in our northern sanctuaries, fire is a critical component of the landscape there. So as we all know, it's been used for millennia by Indigenous Australians, and by excluding fire from these landscapes, it's just not possible. By applying cool patchy burns early in the dry season in areas such as the Kimberley, the Top End, and Cape York, then we're actually reducing late in the dry season burns, so bushfires, by 55%, which just makes a huge difference to the landscape there. It's not just fire, it's not just surveys, it's also feral animal control. So we're dealing with feral animals such as donkeys, camels, buffalo, horses, pigs, cattle. They all damage landscapes by trampling and grazing vegetation, and they degrade soils with their hard hooves. So these animals have a particular impact on wetlands and on watercourses. So we destock large feral herbivores by mustering and culling, and we've established the largest destocked areas across Australia. So 3 of the areas that we've destocked are AWC sites, and they are the largest in Australia. So those are in the Kimberley, up in Wongalara and Pungalina 70 which are all in the north. And just to give you another statistic, we have removed 8,398 large feral herbivores from our sanctuaries in 2020. And that includes our partnership sites, which is a huge effort in a pandemic year. Now, something that we might all be aware of, we might not be, but feral cats are public enemy #1 for Australian wildlife. They're the single greatest threat to our wildlife. They have a profound impact on wildlife populations. So here's another one of my statistics. Here we go. 3 to 4% of Australian bird populations are eaten by cats every year. So every year we lose 3 to 4% of our birds to feral cats. And cats are killing more than 1 million native animals, 1 million native birds, and 1 million reptiles every single night. So as you go to bed tonight, that's how many animals are going to be killed. So it's a bit of a sad figure, unfortunately, but it's the reality. And our focus, is huge on feral cats. We're actually leading the charge by tackling feral cats, by managing habitat to reduce the impact of cats. We're safeguarding, rebuilding populations of threatened species in secure fenced areas, which I'll talk about next. And we are doing the most extensive research into feral cats that's ever been undertaken. So as I mentioned, we've got our network of huge feral predator-free fenced areas. So these are safe havens for wildlife. So some Australian mammal species are so vulnerable to predation by cats and foxes that they can only survive in places that are completely free of these predators. So a great example of that is offshore islands. The greatest stick-nest rat was only found on islands before AWC reintroduced them to New South Wales National Park earlier this year. So to prevent any further extinctions, we need to expand predator-free spaces, and these areas allow us to reintroduce locally extinct animals. So here you can see a map of our feral predator-free safe havens. So in green are the feral predator-free areas. 48 Islands are only island sanctuary, and Mount Zero Tara Vale in the top right there in yellow is our next fenced area that we'll be working on, and our first fenced area in Queensland, which is exciting. So we're restoring these species to areas from which they're missing, and it's Australia's largest rewilding program. So species like the bilbies, bandicoots, bettongs, numbats, which have been decimated by cats and foxes, they're able to repopulate within our network of safe havens. And this is all about preventing extinctions in the short term, rebuilding large sustainable populations of threatened mammal species across multiple sites, and restoring the ecosystem functions performed by these animals. So animals like bilbies, bettongs, they're digging, burrowing, turning over soil, and many of these species play a really important role as ecosystem engineers. Now, of course, this does cost money, and one of the keys to our success is how we spend our money, how we invest in the field, which is significantly more than any other comparable organisation. So I just want to say that the names at the top don't matter so much. It's to highlight the line in red. So AWC spends 12.6% of all donation dollar on fundraising and admin, and almost 90% goes straight on conservation. And compared to other organisations, I mean, they're spending anywhere between 40 and 58%, 61.5%, as you can see here, which we're head and shoulders above. So now I've run you through AWC and what we're working on. We're going to zoom in, and I'm going to pass you over to Viyanna to talk to you about North Head, which is why we're all here.
Thanks, Sophia. That was great. So we'll just see, we'll just give us a moment while we switch over control of the presentation.
That should be available for you there, Viyanna.
Yeah. Not yet, but I'm sure it will be in a second. Okay. All right, we've got it. Okay, all right, so thank you. So I'm just going to go, I know everyone's here, mostly we're here to hear about the fire and all of the management interventions at North Head, but I think it's really important, in order to be able to understand what we've done and why we've done it, that we give you a background to our work at North Head. So AWC has actually been at North Head for 10 years now. So there's a little bit of work that I just want to get you up to date with before I launch into our post-fire work. So just to those of you that don't know North Head well, I'm just going to give you an outline. Sorry, the slides are not moving. At all. So, all right, so hopefully there's not too many delays on that. But yeah, so just to go through it basically, so North Head is almost like an island, as you can see Manly there, and it comes out. So the whole headland is 250 hectares. And then the area in the middle, the blue area there, is 75 hectares. So that area in the centre, like the middle of the donut, is managed by the Sydney Harbour Federation Trust. And we work in partnership. So AWC has been contracted by the Sydney Harbour Federation Trust to do scientific work, conservation and research that feeds into their management plans. And the surrounding area there is national parks. So obviously we predominantly work in the centre of the headland there, but animals don't know tenure and there isn't a fence at North Head. So we actually work across the whole headland. So the ecological value of North Head and why it's important to be protected. So it's got Eastern Suburbs Banksia scrub community, which is a critically endangered community. And there's only 3% left of the Eastern Suburbs Banksia scrub, and over 50% of this is at North Head. So you could see how important it is to preserve this ecological community at the headland, because it's one of the last remnants that's hanging in. And there's also the endangered population of long-nosed bandicoots, little penguins, as well as many other animals. And it also, you may not realise, hopefully a lot of you go walking up there and you're familiar with the headland, but it's actually very diverse. So not only do we have the ESVS, but there's also tall heath, low heath, scrub, woodland, grassland, fernland, wetland, and littoral rainforest. So it's actually very diverse. In the area, there's also 13 mammals. There's also an extra 3 on top of that that we've reintroduced, which I'll go into briefly. We have 88 birds, 21 reptiles, and 7 amphibians. So for a small area of little remnant bushland, it actually packs quite a punch. So it is very important that we preserve this area. So our role at North Head is to implement a science-based program to conserve and restore wildlife and ecosystems. We're also looking at conserving ecosystem processes. So basically we have research projects on the head that monitor all sorts of the fauna, the flora, and also the pollination rates and everything basically on the headland. And then our results from these different monitoring programs go into basically designing the management strategies for the North Head populations. So I'll just go briefly into the different ones. So everyone probably is hopefully familiar with long-nosed bandicoots, especially if you live down in Manly, but we work together with National Parks and Wildlife Service. So they lead the population monitoring, but we work together with them on this survey. So every year there's a large scale headland-wide survey. And this has been going for nearly 14 years, which is really an incredible wealth of data, and also genetic samples that are taken from these animals. And this is used to track the populations and just make sure that they're doing well, to look at the sex ratios. And they put little individual microchips so you can see the population numbers on the headland. We also monitor threats. So the main threats to these ones are cats and foxes, which are the predators. And so we don't get feral cats on North Head, but we get domestic ones that come in from people's houses in the surrounding area, and also red foxes. So we put out camera traps, and then these help us to monitor and determine any infiltrations by predators on the headland. And if we get one on the headland, then we report that to National Parks and they're able to remove it. And then the other threat is also roadkills on the headland. So we also work with National Parks in maintaining a mortality register. So any bandicoot that's killed on North Head, we're able to weigh it and chip it, check the chip, and then we put it onto a register. So we just make sure that the numbers aren't going up, and we can track areas on the headland where you're getting high mortality from vehicles. And then we've also done quite a bit of research on the population just to check their habitat and resource use, and so that we can make sure that they've got everything that they need on the headland to continue thriving. And then also, obviously, the not only threat is cats and foxes, but also urbanisation and fragmentation, and then also the black rats. And on North Head, we've lost over at least 10 species. They're all locally extinct, so they no longer occur on the headland. So you can see on that list, there's the 10 species that we know of that have gone locally extinct. And what you get with this is not only a loss of diversity, but you also get a loss of ecosystem function. So a lot of these animals, they perform particular roles. So for example, the small ground dwelling mammals are turning around the soil, they're increasing soil nutrients, and that helps plants grow as well. And then you've also got your tiny little small mammals, the arboreals, that run around in the plants, and they actually help with pollination rates. So the Eastern Suburbs Banksia scrub is actually highly reliant on small mammals for pollination, as well as birds and insects. And since all of these small mammals have gone locally extinct on the headland, you're losing the mammals that are able to pollinate for us out there. So it's a really important thing to kind of watch. So because of this loss on the headland, we have done reintroductions. So these are the 3 species. We've reintroduced the bush rat, the brown antechinus, and the eastern pygmy possum. All 3 of these used to occur at North Head, but have been lost on the headland due to those threats that I've mentioned. So I'll just go through briefly about each of these ones and how they're going. So the bush rat was reintroduced onto North Head to help control the black rats. So the feral black rats were basically covering the whole headland, And they're a real problem for biodiversity, because not only do they prevent other native animals from establishing, but they eat the eggs of ground-dwelling birds and things like that as well. And they also don't form the same pollination role as other rodents. So basically what we did is we eradicated black rats from sections on the headland, and we reintroduced bush rats into these areas with the idea that once the bush rat had established a territory and it got hold of this good quality habitat, it was about be able to stop the black rats from coming back in. So this has been really successful. The bush rats are now well established at North Head. So originally we introduced them to 15 hectares in the centre of the headland, and they're now occurring in the entire headland. So we actually catch them in all sites across North Head now. And when you do trapping, we actually get only around 20% at the very most black rats, and the rest are bush rats. So they by far outnumber the black rats now, and we don't actually have to control black rats anymore. The bush rats are now keeping them out. So that's been a very successful reintroduction. And then the next one along I'm going to chat about is the pygmy possum. Just hopefully my screen's going to switch. Technology. It's a bit delayed, but it will in a second. I'm sure it's going to catch up. Oh, now it's skipped right forward. So that's just a little video. So I will go on to the pygmy possum, but it's just a video there, just because I know most people think rats are ugly, horrible things. This is just to prove you wrong. Bush rats are very cute. That's just a bush rat at a feeding station when they were first reintroduced, and there's a little baby bush rat, so you can see they're very cute. Okay, now next one. Okay, so the next species that we've reintroduced is the eastern pygmy possum. So this is one of the smallest possums that we have. And you can see that it's my finger in that picture on the right, and that's actually an adult pygmy possum. So they're really tiny little marsupials. So we reintroduced these to North Head because they're really, really good pollinators. So they run around and increase the pollination rates on the headland, and also because just to create like a safe haven for them and help increase the population. So we brought these, the pygmy possums over from sites in state forests in the Central Coast, and we reintroduced them out into nest boxes that we've put throughout the headland. And these little nest boxes, as you can see on the left, are what we use now to monitor them. So 6 times a year, we check the nest boxes just to see how they're going and if they're establishing. So the eastern pygmy possums are doing really well. They're starting to expand across the headland, and we really quite commonly now get them in nest boxes. So at the beginning, the first couple of years, it took them a little while. We'd get like 1 or 2, but now it's consistently, we'll get about 7 or 8 in one survey. And often they're usually individuals that don't have a chip, which means they're new little individuals that haven't actually been caught before. So it shows how well they're breeding. And often these will have pouch young as well, so little babies. And just in the middle, just to explain, we also radio tracked them when we reintroduce them. So that's a little collar that's on that one there, and we're just giving it a little treat before releasing it. Okay, and then the final one was the brown antechinus. So these are small little carnivorous dasyurid. They're really fascinating. They're very ferocious, but the same as the pygmy possums, we use nest boxes and also Elliott traps. These ones we brought over from council sites in the northern beaches, and they're taking a little bit longer to establish. We're going to need to do further reintroductions, which will take up once the burn area started to grow back a bit. But interestingly, we weren't picking these up at all, but after the burn, we've now started to catch them quite frequently again. And I think what happened is that they had actually found a spot that was hard to reach that we couldn't access on North Head, and then after the fire, that area burnt, so they've moved into areas that we can now pick them up at. So it's really good that they're still occurring on the headland. So it's just a really quick little video, just to show you what antechinus are, and then I'll start going into the fire and the impacts on everything. So this is just a little video of some of our work that we've been doing with them with the nest boxes. Okay, so next slide. Okay, all right. The final thing that we do just before I jump into it, just to let you know, so that for the fire you can see what the history of our work is, we also do monitoring on all other fauna and flora on the headland as well. So we have eco-health programs. So with this, we do amphibians, reptiles, birds, vegetation, bats, nocturnal animals, and also owls and things like this. So what this enables us to do is track all of these different species over time. And because we've been doing this for a number of years, it's created a really excellent opportunity to be able to look at pre and post fire and the impacts on these different populations. So this year we'll actually be doing surveys and all of those again, and we'll be able to see how they're all going after the fire. So anyway, I'll just go now into the fire. I won't go too much into the cause or the details of it. So Chad's already outlined the whole fire section of it. I'm just going to go basically, I'll show you just how it impacted the sections that we work on and the animals that we work with. So there in red, the really dark red you can see, so that's the area that was burnt in the uncontrolled fire in October. And then the lighter red colour is the prescribed burn that was done the month before. So in total, when it connects up around, we've got 79 hectares on North Head that is some degree of being burnt at the moment, which is actually 31% of North Head, and 46% of the eastern suburbs Banksia scrub community burnt. So basically, obviously our most important, after the fire, our focus was obviously on the fauna. And so we jumped in basically trying to do whatever we could to sort of give them a helping hand. So the most significant threats after a fire, injury and smoke inhalation. Then you have predators. So you have a reduced habitat, increased predation. You get native predators such as birds. You get a lot of currawongs and eagles and raptors and different things, and they all hover and they often go into fire scars. And then also you'll often frequently get increased visitation from foxes and also cats too. And then you get the reduction in resources. So you lose significant amounts of habitat. So you're losing the cover for the animals and their ability to be able to hide, and also their access to food and water. You also get increased competition because you have a huge area of lost habitat. You're increasing the competition in the areas where habitat is remaining. And we were also concerned about the reinvasion of the black rats. So we were a bit worried that in the areas where the bush rats have been killed, that the black rats would be able to infiltrate back in. And then long term, there's the risk of loss of genetic diversity. So when you lose a population, part of a population, especially in a small area, you can get issues with long-term loss of genetics. So these are all our kind of main priorities and the things that we had to act quite fast on. So we went out and did search and rescue. So some of these Chad has already mentioned, and a lot of this was done in collaboration with national parks. So there was the search and rescue was immediately after Taronga set up a wildlife clinic. And this was basically just looking for any injured animals or animals that had smoke inhalation that we could help. And then the long-term concern is also that it's going to take about 2 years for the eastern suburbs Banksia scrub to regenerate, and also the other vegetation to return to any sort of an extent, I think, where it's going to sort of provide protection or start to increase this area of habitat like we had before. So basically, one of our main priorities, within a week, we were out there putting out more habitat. So you can see in this picture, there's that long green tunnel. So what we call these artificial refuge tunnels. And what these are is they're 50 metres long. We put 18 of these throughout the burn area. And what they do is they create a chance for small animals to get protection. So it's chicken wires underneath the shade cloth. And so small mammals can run in at any point along that tunnel and they can get protection from things that are chasing them. They can also forage in between the tunnels and around them and then still be safe. They can forage underneath the tunnels. And predators are unable to chase them in or access them. So we install these around the edge of the habitat, so intact vegetation. So in essence, you're kind of increasing the area. And also we use these to connect little islands of vegetation so that the animals can access intact vegetation areas. We also put out, we doubled our nest box number. So nest boxes were those little houses that we put the pygmy possums and the brown antechinus in. So we had 50 of these that we've been looking at long term on the headland. We put out another 50, mostly throughout the burn area. So any animals surviving would have areas of refuge. And we also put these inside the vegetation areas so that if there was increased competition, there wouldn't be as much of a competition over resources. Working with national parks, we put out the bandicoot bungalows, which were just little islands of vegetation and pallets. So the bandicoots, once again, had areas to retreat to and to feed. And we did an immediate survey after the fire where we did our headland-wide survey for all of the different mammals. And what we found, which was quite surprising, was that a lot of the mammals were actually staying in the burn area. So we sort of thought that they would all head into the areas of intact vegetation, but things that survived actually held onto their territories, even though there's no resources. So we had a lot of animals that were in really poor body condition. And this is what kind of fed into the decision with national parks to do supplementary feeding. We also deployed straight after water stations over the headland. So although there was a lot of rain straight after the fire, there's not a lot of water that's actually drinkable, because when you get ash in the water, it actually makes the water toxic. So we put fresh water stations, and we still maintain those now. The supplementary food gets maintained every week. And I'll just go across the next slide so you can see some pictures of these things I'm talking about. Delayed again, here we go. Yeah, so that's just the nest box on the left. And then also another thing that we're deploying are these called habitat pods. And this is working with national parks and also with Macquarie University and Reef Designs. And what they are is they're biodegradable habitat pods. So the concern with the tunnels is that long term you have to remove them, and that this could damage the vegetation. So these habitat pods will biodegrade within 12 months. And it's an idea where this is part of a PhD project now that we'll be deploying them out in clusters. And what that means is that the animals can go into any of these areas, the same as the tunnels, to get protection, but they won't damage the environment because they'll biodegrade. And what this means is these are things that could be deployed post-fire in other areas. And I think the main thing and priority with all of this work was, after the Black Summer fires, there were so many questions about what to do after fire because nobody really quite knew. And there was a lot of gaps in research. So people were like feeding, putting supplementary food out everywhere and habitat, but everyone was really unsure if it was going to be bringing in black rats or increasing predation, or are the animals actually going to even use this? And it was created like a really difficult, it was really hard to respond without knowing exactly what to do. So the silver lining with this is that because we've got 10 years of working at North Head, we have a huge wealth of data that we can use. And we were able to be out there the day after the fire installing all of these management interventions. And they've all been turned into research projects now. So they're all either master's projects or PhD projects. And so it'll all be publications on all of these. And we'll be looking at seeing what species are using them, if they're bringing in black rats, how often they get used. For the food, we'll be looking at tree deployment versus ground deployment, different types of food. So it's just going to be in so much data. And I hope that what it will be able to do is create a good template, which means that after a fire, we know exactly what to do, what food to deploy for what species, what habitat to put out. And it will mean that everyone will be a little bit more prepared and able to act faster after other fires. So just a little video. So this is in the tunnels, just to show you, this is a bush rat. So you can see it's just going into one of the water stations there. So we have so much video data now of all different native species using these tunnels. So they've been really successful. They're definitely getting used. The same with the bandicoot bungalows, and the supplementary food is being taken by reptiles, by bush rats, by pygmy possums, by long-nosed bandicoots. So everything's getting used, and it's been really good in that way. So long-term on North Head, to do with the fire, we're just going to be continually monitoring. So all of those different species I said, so the birds, reptiles, the vegetation, the amphibians, everything we'll be monitoring this year. So we'll be able to compare how the populations are going to before and just make sure that there's nothing extra that they need in order to be able to maintain their populations on the headland. We'll be tracking the genetics of all the different populations to make sure there's no impacts as well. Just continually checking for competition and body condition. And our most recent survey that we did on the headland, so the first one we did after the fire showed poor body condition. We just did one about 4 weeks ago, and everything's looking a lot better, a lot healthier. So it really is really quite amazing, really how resilient these animals are. And it really does give me hope. I think that everything is still doing so well. The populations are still hanging in there. So I think with just continued work and ongoing monitoring, there's good hope that things will be able to recolonize into these areas once things grow back. So yeah, that's the end of my section. So thanks everybody. I'm just going to pass back to Sophia now.
Okay, so thank you. That was absolutely.
Sorry, we've just got one more thing to show you. I hope you don't mind.
That's a video that's a little bit long.
It's a 2 minutes
Okay.
If that's all right. I think it'd be worth it. He's one of our biggest
Very
supporters.
good video. I think people will find it interesting.
Can you hear it all right?
Yes, it's good.
Australia now is the guardian of a unique collection of animals and mammals, birds, insects, flowers, unlike anything else in the world. It is a wonder to an English naturalist when you go there, and it's all in your hands. What astonishes me about Australia, when you look out and you see this vast area that you have, and the possibilities that you then have of really taking large-scale and swinging solutions to the problem. I look with wonder when I hear AWC talk about building a fence, and the thought that an organisation like AWC could devise that plan and put that plan in motion is mind-blowing. That is a marvellous example, actually, to me, of how important it is that it should be science-based. It isn't any good just putting a fence around a place and letting him get on with it. It has to have informed scientists, dedicated scientists who understand about ecology and indeed about animals' cycles and ethology and all these things. Only then can you really grapple with the problems. And that's why AWC is so very important. And science runs through the whole activities of AWC in a most admirable way. And it is essential that it should, if it's going to succeed. There are a lot of ingredients to success in conservation. Part of it, of course, is money. Part of it, of course, is having the area where you can do things. Part of it, of course, is having science behind you. And part of it, of course, is having dedicated people who give their lives to dealing with these problems.
Thanks very much. I'll just quickly finish up just by saying that we are running a $3 million matching challenge until midnight tonight. So if you did want to support us, we'll be matching the donations as is on your screen. But thank you so much to everyone who already supports us, and I will end that there.
So how do we support you, Sophie? Is there a website or something like that?
Yeah, so you can go to the Australian Wildlife, so australianwildlife.org, and you can support us via donations there, and you can also sign up to volunteer if you want to.
So guys, how interesting was that? And I'll tell you what, it's so reassuring to know that we have the expertise with National Parks and Wildlife and with AWC, just here in our whole neighbourhood, just looking after everything and making it happen. A couple of quick questions for you before we finish up. First one's for you, Chad, from Bill. He just wants to know, where do Indigenous fire practices fit into the fire management structure? Has anything been done in that regard yet?
Yeah, yeah. And we already do cultural burning across the whole state. There are some difficulties, around the urban interface and different vegetation types. So each, it's much easier to do those slow, cool burns out west in Cumberland, for example, where we've got those open grasslands and like. When we're dealing with, and vegetation communities have changed over time. We've got heath here, a variety of different ecological communities, but the predominant one being a heath type vegetation community. In general, fire out here at North Head, consumes the entire profile of that vegetation community, and it can be volatile. It can be difficult to ignite, and then it will consume the entire profile, and its characteristic is to spot, basically. So yeah, there's some complexities around all different types of vegetation.
Okay, thank you. I've just got two more questions that have come through. I'm not sure who would answer this one. So Gemma wants to know what is happening with the bird habitat, such as the wetland birds, and is the vegetation regenerating in this area yet?
And I guess we can both answer to that.
The wetland habitat is really interesting, and even the influence on it, I guess the man-made influence of it on it. I'm not sure whether the community knows about that freshwater wetland out there.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing, isn't it? How it was originally created because it was from modified habitat from the army days, and then it's actually now become this listed wetland community,
Oh,
which
really?
is amazing. Yeah, so I mean, I think it's just going to take some time for everything to regenerate. So you're not going to get the birds using the area until there's habitat again, especially if they want to nest as well. Like you're going to need a lot of like the low-lying vegetation and things for the ground-dwelling sort of nesting birds and things as well. So I do think it will regenerate, and when it regenerates, the animals will sort of return, but it's just going to take some time.
Okay, great. All right, and the last question we've got is from Judy, who lives on the Eastern Hill. She said that she's noticing a lot more bandicoot droppings in their yard, and she's wondering if this is because there's more bandicoots or because there's not enough food for them up at North Head.
Yeah, I mean, it could, yeah, I mean, yeah, it could be, but I mean, the population's looking good, but
Yeah.
I mean, if you lose an area of habitat, there's a good chance things are going to go to other areas. That's kind of maybe what could be happening.
Yeah, a bit of both, as Viyanna says. I mean, the numbers, we've just had our yearly survey in May. The numbers look great, but yeah, as Viyanna says, they're expanding or moving out of affected habitat to other opportunities.
Okay, one more quick one. So Yana wants to know what plant species will come back, and are some things gone for good as a result of the fire?
This one I'll definitely let Chad answer. I'm not very good, as my botany is not my strong point.
Yeah, and look, it's unlikely. Generally, heathlands, again, the area affected, we describe it overall as kind of a heath environment, even though we talk about, eastern suburbs, Banksia scrub, and there's other EECs there, including the freshwater wetlands. But generally, that type of vegetation community is very well adapted to high intensity fire and recovers well. One of the things I was talking about earlier was around thresholds, and that's one of the issues we have across many of our areas. Much of the risk profile around where we do our hazard reduction or our prescribed burns is around asset protection. Sometimes some of our key ecological communities, as I suggested previously, may lose out a little bit there and fall outside of the threshold for a prescribed burn to keep it a healthy one. And so that's the research that we're undertaking through the burnt area, is the difference between those fire thresholds. You've got areas that have been long unburnt and areas which have been recently burnt within those thresholds, and they recover better if they've had a regular and within prescription burn, I guess. It's an ongoing research, but it seems it looks unlikely that in the long term anything will be affected in that way.
Oh, that's great. I think one of the things that I've found particularly interesting as we start to wrap things up now is all the new science that's coming out of this, and the opportunity that the fires actually brought us to look at ways to look after the animals and what they need, and the replantings and so on. So it's good to see that some very good positives have come out of this. So on behalf of our participants who have been here tonight, I really want to thank the three of you for your time and for giving up your evening really to share your passion with us. Clearly you're all very passionate, and we're very grateful for the work that you all do. And I'd also like to acknowledge and thank Wendy Marceau, who's from the Good for Manly team, who's managed to pull you all together. And thank you all for your flexibility on switching to tonight, and for our participants for jumping online and showing your enthusiasm and being here tonight as well. So thanks everybody. Have a good evening, and we'll see you at our next talk.